Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. I'm Morgan McClintock, the CEO of startup marketing agency Firebrand. We've launched this podcast to interview the best in the business, but I'm not going to do it alone. So please meet my co-hosts.
I'm Nicole Pytel, Firebrand's VP of Content Marketing.
And I'm Chris Ulbrich, Firebrand's Head of Media Relations.
I'm Ian Lipner, a tech PR and crisis communications veteran.
We'll drop a new episode each week, so there's plenty of fuel for your marketing fire. Get the spark you need to take your startup to a whole new level.
Welcome to Fired Up. I'm one of your hosts, Ian Lipner. You're probably wondering, where is Morgan? Well, everyone deserves some PTO. Summertime. It's important to charge up. It's important to make sure you've got plenty of energy because you're going to need to create some great content. And, maybe if you're a salesperson, you're going to need to keep your calling numbers up and get excited about all the leads that may be coming through your pipeline. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how to choose which leads to go after all that energy was expended to get people excited. Nicole Pytel's with me today, and we're going to talk more about lead scoring. Nicole.
Yeah. Hey, Ian. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. We're super excited to have one of our own here today. And like we do so many times on Fired Up, we are giving you a very exclusive sneak peek. In the coming weeks, we are going to release a very cool asset related to lead scoring because, so many leads, so little time. How do you weed through them all? How do you focus on who's best to target, who's not so great to target, where should you spend your time and money and resources? Because startup marketers never have enough of any of those things. So Ian, why don't you introduce the Firebrander who is joining us today?
Yes, we are so lucky to have on our staff a dynamo in this regard, sort of a architect for digital marketing, if you will. We have Arman Khayyat. He's a senior digital marketing professional with deep experience in B2B. He has worked in all the areas. He's worked in data warehousing and cleaning. He's worked on UX and UI. And now he leads the technical SEO program for Firebrand. So he's an expert on on-page SEO as well, SEM. He knows B2B like the back of his hand. And he's got B2C experience too. He knows data viz. He's amazing. And we're going to talk to him more today about lead scoring. Arman, thank you for joining with that big intro.
Thanks so much. Wow, big shoes to fill. Glad to be here.
Yes, well, they're yours. They're your shoes. You've created those big shoes to fill. Hopefully we won't have to fill them otherwise ever. Let's set the scene, though. We're here to talk about lead scoring. What is it? Why do organizations do it? And what are some of the common approaches that they take?
All right, let's get into it. Again, appreciate you guys for having me today. I think we'll have a lot of fun and hopefully teach the audience about a lot here today. Lead scoring. It is a phenomenon in marketing that has a lot of points of contention and it has a lot of gray area. There's a lot of difficulty in implementing it. There's a lot of difficulty in understanding the strategy of how to. And the reason why is that there's so many things within business that can affect how different organizations go about it. At its core, it's a methodology that basically goes about ranking prospects in a scale for numerical values. Those prospects are contacts, basically any type of lead that comes into your website, contacts that are obtained via any type of action on the site in which you have some kind of contact capture, right? That process basically is built on assigning what's called scores that are positive or negative to these contacts based on characteristics and actions. We do lead scoring based on various different types of accounts and intent. That's first party, third party data attributes, and it's essentially used to determine the sales readiness of leads. That's the idea. It's essentially the process of assigning quantitatively the ability to be able to determine sales readiness and understanding how, when someone comes into your website and comes into your business, which interacts with your business, being able to identify what part of the buying cycle they are part of, if at all, because that's a big part of lead scoring as well, is that, we often find that throughout that buying cycle, there's a big drop off sometimes in the beginning. The larger question is, we understand that a contact is going through the buying cycle in a meaningful manner. What do we do about it? And how do we make that actionable?
You mentioned both demographics and behavioral aspects. And so on the surface, it sounds so intuitive. I'm a cybersecurity company. A CISO comes in and downloads a white paper, becomes a known lead, then comes in and signs up and clicks on all of the CTAs in our newsletter. He's obviously a giant target, somebody that we definitely want to be talking to. His lead score would be super, super high. It's so intuitive, but yet it is so hard to carry out in reality. So what are some of the challenges that organizations face when they try to do lead scoring?
There are a lot of them. B2B environments, often, almost always, from different organizations that we see that we deal with from all the way across the market, they have the process of having to involve assigning value to potential leads based on really their likelihood to convert into customers. That idea of getting them all the way through the end of the buying cycle is what actually inherently, ironically in itself, is what causes the amount of challenges that lead scoring presents. And there are a lot of those. One of those is data quality and availability. B2B often lacks, completeness when it comes to touch points with potential leads. A lot of times it's raw data that there isn't, much else that's taken and really nurtured upon in the beginning. Sometimes that data can be incorrect or outdated information that can skew the buying process. Another thing is complexity when it comes to buyer journeys. A lot of times there's multiple decision makers, right? We know this in B2B. B2B purchasing decisions, they involve a lot of stakeholders. Sometimes those stakeholders can be very different in some businesses. You're talking about marketing teams that sometimes don't have a sales team. Sometimes you're talking about a sales team that's very small, that might have one BDR or no BDRs at all. Sometimes we're talking about a sales team that has 100 BDRs. So these different things and these different factors can really affect that and present different types of challenges. That said, the alignment itself between marketing and sales is another challenge in itself. There's different priorities that are in place. Talking about marketing and sales teams, sometimes they have different views on even what, constitutes a qualified lead. Those things can be very different, not even from a quantitative standpoint, but from a theoretical standpoint. Marketing may view that in their efforts and in their campaign efforts is very different to what sales does. That presents challenges in itself. That inherently also can create communication issues, right? Cross-functional communication issues. That type of gap in collaboration can lead to misaligned lead scoring criteria, which in itself is a massive challenge of lead scoring. There's a lot that goes into this. There's a few other big ones, that come to the top of mind as well. Integrations, tech integrations themselves, like actual technological, I would say, barriers and preventative factors within integrations. So you're talking about integrations with CRMs and other tools, integrating lead scoring models with your existing CRM system. Sometimes that's not the easiest thing. Sometimes your lead scoring model is not directly built in your CRM. You have to have some kind of a third-party integration in order to make it work. That creates data silos, disparate data sources, lacking integration and having, issues with the effectiveness of lead scoring. Those are things that can make things break. One simple thing can change. If you have an intermediary type of technology, and that can create problems. That in itself also creates the opportunity for customizing and also generically building models, right? Sometimes the solution as well, can we standardize? Well, standardizing lead scoring models may not fit the specific needs of a business. And then customization can reflect unique business processes, but then in effect, hurts predictive accuracy sometimes. At times we're thinking about, okay, are we overfitting? Are we underfitting? So then in that regard, is it better to standardize? That's a question that comes up. That concept of really overfitting and underfitting is massive when it comes to lead scoring. Sometimes models might be too specific, that being overfitting, and sometimes they're too general, and that being underfitting, and that leads to inaccuracy. And then, of course, that also entails behavioral challenges as well. Lead behavior can change. That really out of itself necessitates model validation and adjustments. That would be a laundry list of things that you need to keep in mind. And then, as we kind of get more into the discussion, how do you toggle all of these things? Because there's a lot of subjectivity to it. If you don't know how to address that, where's your starting point?
Yeah, that's a lot. Lead scoring ain't easy, I guess, huh? So you're saying, you can have bad data, outdated data. You can have, complex buyer journeys, large, complex teams that are going out with, and responding to the opportunities, a lack of alignment between marketing and sales, tech integration barriers, and then this sort of the interplay between standardization and customization. All these things are hard to manage. I'm a marketer. I want to start with one of those things that I know you got to get right from the beginning, and that's the alignment part. How do you make sure that lead scoring models align with business goals?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that. If I could create a hierarchy of it, in my mind, from my experience and what I've seen be effective, I think one of the first things is defining clear objective. So that means, having your business goals and setting your business goals clearly align one-to-one to metrics. So clearly defining, what the business aims to achieve with lead scoring. What's your main objective? Is your main objective to simplify things for sales or quantify as information comes in from demand generation programs and involves all different channels and sources? Is it simply to quantify? What does that look like? Is that just increasing conversion rates? Are we only creating a lead scoring model because we feel like it'll help us on the back end and inherently, affect the front end in improving conversion rates? We have a better understanding of who these people are, improving sales efficiency and enhancing customer retention. That's kind of on the back end of the buyer journey, right? That's one thing. Are those things that are important to your business? Do you have the ability to identify that? Aligning metrics, that's one-to-one with business goals. So we're talking about, ensuring metrics that are used in lead scoring, reflect those business goals. So for example, if the goal is to improve conversion rates, focus on metrics that indicate a lead's likelihood to purchase, right? Maybe you give more weight to that. So that's really important. The concept between collaboration when it comes to marketing and sales is very important here. Regardless of the size of your sales program and the capabilities of your sales team, the collaboration between the two is essential. There are times and there's organizations in which marketing is not even involved in creating lead scoring. It directly comes from sales. Marketing doesn't even see it and they don't pass it. What is your objective? Is it marketing? And is their grasp on demand generation direct? And is it organic and where it starts there? Well, you got to conduct regular workshops and meetings between marketing and sales to align those even lead definitions, scoring criteria, and what those goals are. From that concept comes what I like to refer to as feedback loops. And feedback loops are actually a very common and very strong topic within lead scoring, and I think that they're underused at times. When we talk about a feedback loop within this relationship, we're really talking about establishing a continuous type of feedback loop, and continuous being the key word, where sales provides feedback on the quality of those leads generated by the scoring model. That being whether or not it was initially created by them and improved by marketing or vice versa. That really doesn't really affect the cadence of this in a way. Using a feedback loop to be able to refine and improve, and that'll be a common theme here, is really important. That collaboration is essential. And then another thing that comes to mind is making sure that the approach is data-driven. So leveraging data analytics to identify the attributes and behavior that most strongly correlate with successful conversions for your business, right? What does that look like for you? Data audits, that's part of the data-driven approach. I think that, conducting those audits of that data quality and accuracy to ensure that the model is based on reliable information is essential, right? Because those can be lost a lot of times. And really a lot of this is, it does require a lot of lifting and it requires a lot of consistency. It's almost like a professional athlete. If you think of a basketball player, right? Where you have coaches and you have players on both sides and your guards aren't, doing enough drills on, at the free throw line. Or there's sometimes they're shooting their free throws, but they're not working on their handles. That's, starts from your starter all the way down to your bench players, right? That's really important. And then customizing scoring models is going to be big here. And it always is. That comes down to two things for me: tailoring criteria and segment-based scoring. Tailored criteria really is the concept of customizing your lead scoring criteria to, reflect the unique aspects of a business, and then segmenting that. So segmenting means basically developing different scoring models or different segments, in different customer profiles to ensure alignment with specific business goals. That all in itself, encapsulates the need for continuous improvement. As I mentioned, monitoring performance, A/B testing goes into that, conducting different various types of scoring models and criteria if it doesn't work out initially, and you're finding that there's a gap and there's issues coming from feedback from it. And then different iterations and refinement. Lead scoring is not something that you pop in to your CRM or, in your intermediary between your CRM and you leave it, right? It's really a matter of improvement. That's why integrating technology and tools is really important here and making sure that you're doing it in an organized fashion. CRM integration is essential. Your CRM is really going to make or break your lead scoring model, is how that data is populating into there or if it's directly in there itself. All these factors, and there's a long list are kind of essential to, from a strategy standpoint of organizations ensuring that their lead scoring models align with your business goals. I think as a whole, these are preventative measures, but they're also proactive measures.
I love that you brought up business goals and metrics in the same sentence, because I feel like we say this to clients all the time. The data tells the story. We can give you the best hypothesis in the world, the most educated guess, but it's still a guess. And the data is going to tell us whether or not we were right. And so I love that you put those things together right in the first place. And there are so many metrics you can use here. So if I'm just getting started out, I'm a startup marketer, I'm trying to implement this on my own, I'm trying to brush up on my skills, I'm trying to figure this out, I know what we're trying to achieve as a business. Are there maybe some basic metrics I should start with and build up to, kind of like crawl before I try to walk kind of thing? Because there's so many directions I can go in and there's so many ways to customize this. Should it start with something simple like the number of leads that actually get accepted by sales? Because I think a lot of time marketers think, hey, we've generated great leads, and sales is like, these are not the right people we should be talking to at all. So should it be sales accepted leads? Is that a metric? Is it time to conversion? If we can speed that up, is that a good metric to start with? Where do you start in terms of metrics? What's a good core to start with?
When it comes to, when we talk about quantifying and using metrics to evaluate the effectiveness of lead scoring, it comes in tiers, and those metrics are used in different ways. The initial part of it, which is quantifying leads themselves, right? And this is a concept that's affected by some of the other ways in which we quantify. Qualifying leads at their core, just the concept of the percentage of leads that might meet the criteria for actually being passed to the sales team. That in itself, obviously helps to assess whether the scoring model is correctly identifying qualified leads. What does that look like? Well, before anything is even done, and we know that we have a lead on hand, there are some, I guess you could call, unanimously accepted ways, regardless of how they're identified. And there's a lot that goes into how they're identified for a business, that we go about that. There's a process in which we move through that, but typically, more often than not, our first stage that we want to be able to identify is a marketing qualified lead, right? So what does a marketing qualified lead look like? That is, in your point system, it's in a way of identifying your first phase of whether or not you're going to be passing a lead to sales, right? Before they're even sales ready. So Nicole brings up the concept of SALs, or sales accepted leads. Before we can get there, we have to make sure that our positive and negative criteria is able to identify what's a marketing qualified lead. That in itself is a step in the right direction from a very simple standpoint, but not necessarily enough to make actionable. So when we think about that, the journey in itself from a lead quality standpoint quantitatively is somewhere around an MQL to what some organizations identify as a BQL, or a business qualified lead. And then we get to what's either a sales qualified lead or a sales accepted lead. That nuance in itself is dependent on how scoring is implemented. So if we talk about a sales accepted lead, that in itself is inherently the percentage of marketing qualified leads that are accepted by the sales team. High acceptance rates there indicate alignment between marketing and sales on lead quality. If that's strong, you're headed in the right direction and your model is working towards proficiency, or in itself, it's already a well-oiled machine, sometimes at times as well. That in itself then leads to, the end of the buyer journey, the end of the sales cycle. That's quantitatively from assessing lead quality itself. There's actually other metrics around lead scoring that we often don't talk about. These are things that marketers have a decent understanding of, whether or not there's a quantitative implementation as to how we go about that. These concepts are very known. The things that are sometimes missed between the cracks, and how when we talk about assessing leads and how we use metrics to evaluate the effectiveness of lead scoring, there are some ones that are kind of usually falling between the cracks. Some of those are, for example, lead to customer conversion rate. That in itself as a concept sometimes is lost because we're so in between the cracks and understanding the MQL to SQL buyer journey. Sometimes the actual concept, the simple calculation of the number of percentages of leads that actually meet the criteria to being passed is lost just from a numerical standpoint, from a quantitative standpoint. That's important because that in itself can give you a little bit of information about whether or not your identification of an MQL is accurate, because sometimes that may not be the case. And then again, in the same light, sales cycle length. The actual length of a sales cycle can be quantified. Time to close can be quantified. the average time it takes for a lead, to move through a sales pipeline and become a customer, that's something that can be measured. What does that mean for your business? Pipeline contribution, in the same light as well. Revenue from scored leads. If we're looking at total revenue generated from leads in itself, identified in the scoring model, that metric can help quantify the financial impact of lead scoring, really from an ROI standpoint. That is directly related to pipeline velocity. Pipeline velocity within pipeline contribution is basically the concept in which the speed at which a lead moves through your sales pipeline. And is measured as the rate of new deals that are created and closed. These are a lot of times metrics that are now moved away from marketing on the sales side. And the identification and the implementation of them is also really going to be one thing that's looked at, particularly on the actual build and the manpower of these teams. And then engagement metrics, right? Engagement metrics are something that's constantly used in lead scoring, but sometimes falls as secondary to some of the core metrics that we use to identify leads, that being lead engagement. So we're looking at things like email open rates, click-through rates, content downloads by leads, cost metrics that go through that. So cost per lead, the average cost from a marketing side of actually acquiring that lead. And effective lead scoring can really help in reducing that cost. That's one of the efforts of lead scoring inherently. Customer acquisition cost. This is definitely more of a sales concept, the total cost of acquiring a new customer. That includes marketing and sales expenses both. And then, of course, when it comes to the accuracy, predictive accuracy of lead scoring, measuring the accuracy in which in which the model actually predicts leads that will convert, that can be quantified. That in itself, by the way, from a marketing lingo standpoint, is what's called an F1 score. A lot of times we refer to an F1 score. That's directly what it refers to. The sales efficiency, that's one thing that can be measured as well. So productivity and win rate, the percentage of opportunities that actually result in a sale. A higher win rate obviously suggests that your scoring model is more accurately identifying leads. And then I guess what you could call it as the, especially within the framework of lead scoring, what sometimes is looked at as the holy grail of scores from a sales standpoint when it comes to lead scoring, which is CLV, customer lifetime value, the customer lifetime value of scored leads. The average lifetime value of customers acquired through leads identified from a scoring model, the higher that is, means that the model is really effective in identifying leads that are likely to become long-term value customers. That in itself definitely is a concept that is more akin to larger sales teams.
Wow. So you really took us there from like the beginning crawl to take tiny steps to all the way to being able to calculate lifetime value. All of that customer lifetime value can be included as part of a completely built out lead scoring model. So you start out just, hey, let's be able to count our qualified leads and, whether they're marketing qualified, whether they're business qualified, whether they're sales qualified, whether sales accepted. And then you can start to kind of look at like, hey, how are those ratios stacking up before you can get into some of these more specific things like, okay, let's look at how long is the sales cycle? And, now we're getting into velocity and things like that, which, by the way, I've been hearing cycles are slowing right now in B2B sales. Is that true, Arman?
Generally, from a market standpoint, yes. They really have been for a couple of years now.
Yeah, so these metrics, they have to be taken in context, right? But they have to be relying on data that is good data, right? That was like the first thing that you said is like, got to start out knowing that your data is good. How do you ensure that not only is your data accurate, but your model is accurate?
The concept that this really entails, I think, is tiered. One of the most basic ways to prevent issues with this is, good data quality management. What does that look like? First of all, who's managing? Are your marketers, well versed enough to be able to handle when it comes to data cleaning and data enrichment? Data enrichment is a little bit easier. When it comes to data cleaning, do you have processes that are automated? Do you have the ability to do that? Do you have to outsource it? Right? A lot of businesses have to outsource that. That's a cost in itself. You have to outsource a cost of making sure your data is clean and it's enriched. That's going to affect the scale of sometimes your lead scoring program, because that can be expensive. Contracting out data scientists is not a cheap thing sometimes for organizations. Talk about data cleaning. What does that look like? Updating your data, making sure you're removing duplicates, correcting errors, ensuring accuracy, making sure your fields are, if you're using a CRM, make sure fields are populating, being sent through in an accurate way. When that breaks, how do you fix it? You got to go back, look at your lists and make sure that those are cleaned up on the back end as well. Data enrichment really is a concept of making sure any additional information from external sources are used to fill the gaps and improve really the robustness of your scoring model. Sometimes all of the information that you capture, when you obtain the contact information for a lead isn't the full picture that you may be looking for in order for your lead scoring model to work. That's part of that. That in itself creates a need for defining clear and relevant criteria, right? This is one of the most important concepts in lead scoring. Identifying key attributes, the most relevant attributes and behaviors that are really likely to indicate that a lead is going to convert. What does it look like? Firmographics, engagement metrics, past interactions, things like that. And then weighting factors, assigning the weight, and this is the logic and the calculation behind the lead scoring model in itself, assigning those appropriate weights to different criteria based on the importance in predicting lead conversion. If you don't get that right, then the quality of your data can be meaningless at times because inherently as it's coming in, it's flawed, right? Depending on your own business goals. That's something that is not stagnant. It's something that's identified that when it's built out for a business, you think that you have a good grasp on, and quarter to quarter, it may change. So those are things that are kind of key here and that can affect it. Then there's, the concept of also kind of using predictive analytics and machine learning, right? This is definitely more advanced, right? So advancing algorithm, continuous learning, so implementing models that can actually learn and adapt over time as data becomes available to enrich what's being fed into your CRM in terms of the data coming into your lead scoring. That is sometimes possible if you have the capability to do that in-house, right? That can be helpful, but it really requires already a pretty good understanding and enough of a sample size to be able to create your own set of training data in a way to be able to inform your lead scoring model, which is more advanced. But from a more basic standpoint, things like regular model validation and testing, so A/B testing, lift analysis to compare conversion rates between leads and different scores, continuously monitoring that data and adjustment. So performance tracking is very simple here, right? In terms of monitoring key metrics such as conversion rates, lead quality, sales cycle length. And then again, I brought this up earlier when we were talking about teams cross-functionally, but feedback loops, right? Feedback loops, again, I think are one of the most, underused components of ensuring cross-functionally that a lead scoring model is working accurately. When we talk about data within the framework of data, establishing a feedback loop within sales to gather insights on lead quality and adjusting that model is very key to making sure that that data is accurate enough to active conversation, from a very basic standpoint. And then integrations with CRMs and marketing automation tools. From a very simple standpoint, the more seamless your integration is and the less friction you have in between raw data that's coming into your lead scoring model and your CRM, the better. So ensuring that your lead scoring model is integrated with your CRM and any type of marketing automation tools that you're using allows for better real-time data updates and accurate tracking. Also creates the potential for automation depending on the tools that you're using. Automating your lead scoring process can help, but we'll get into that in a little bit. There are some caveats with that. That in itself can reduce manual errors, but sometimes manual errors are necessary based on your business goals, which we'll get to in a little bit. So those are really the main ones. I think those are the main approaches and then the main preventative measures that you can take to make sure that your data is reliable when it comes to your lead scoring model.
I think the easiest way to sum that up is to say, no, you cannot set and forget lead scoring. There's a lot of analysis and tinkering and feedback and cooperation with sales and just a lot to look at to make sure that the model is doing what it is supposed to be doing. But in between all of that analysis, and you've mentioned, the CRM and even making some manual errors, does there have to be a manual element involved on a day-to-day basis? Can this be fully automated in your CRM? Or, is this something that if I'm a marketer, I'm going to be, kind of tinkering every day with this?
Really, Nicole, that comes down to two theoretical approaches to lead scoring. There's a decision to be made for any business when you're talking about lead scoring between predictive and manual lead scoring. Those are two different things. Predictive is automated in sometimes completely, or sometimes it's automated in a hybrid fashion. But just really quickly for our listeners to identify what that means and what it looks like. Traditional lead scoring is really based on a set of predetermined criteria and subjective assumptions, right? That's traditional to where you set that up based on your business needs and it's built on. Predictive lead scoring, uses machine learning algorithms, some of which we kind of referred to earlier, to analyze a lot of data that's coming in and identifying the most relevant predictors of lead quality. It's predictive. Anytime you're going to go on that route, there is going to be some advantages in terms of efficiency. And then there's always going to be some things that you lose, right? So when you talk about predictive lead scoring and automation, some advantages are scalability, right? So making the process more scale for larger volumes of leads and efficiently. Sometimes a lot of larger enterprises go with that, and they try to avoid the headache and the accuracy and the more fine points of accuracy that kind of come in there. That in itself actually is an issue in B2B, right? Sometimes larger enterprises can scale for, just from having enough data historically from their view to be able to automate creates a lot of the issues that we've actually talked about up to this point. But that in itself also can create, some points of improvement when it comes to accuracy. So identifying patterns and correlations that might not be apparent in manual scoring. There are benefits when it comes to algorithms and ML algorithms that can actually build predictive models that you may lose, right? That are a little bit more advanced. It also makes it sometimes more adaptable. So continuously improving more as more data is fed into the model. At the end of the day, we can't work as quickly as algorithms can. That's one thing that you do gain there. And then there's, manual lead scoring, right? Manual lead scoring in itself has its advantages as well. One of those, from a very simple standpoint is simplicity, right? Simplicity is important, particularly when we're talking about smaller businesses, right? Smaller B2B businesses. So it's easier to understand, right? It's easier to implement, especially for small businesses I mentioned. It also gives you more control, right? Allows marketers and sales teams to be able to apply their industry knowledge directly within their lead scoring model without having to rely on having a large enough sample set to be able to build something that's automated. And then, that inherently also makes it more transparent, right? So, criteria and scoring processes are clear and they're easily adjustable. And that's one thing that is a clear advantage when you're talking about manual lead scoring. So then the question really arises of, well, how do you determine, what's right for your business? Is it just your size? You just say, okay, well, I've read, these articles on Medium and HubSpot, and looks like we have this many employees and this big of a marketing team in sales. Maybe we just go based on our manpower, right? And a lot of times that's a decision that businesses make. But there are actually, there's quite a bit more that goes into it to determine that. Business size and volume is important, right? So the volume of leads in itself is one thing that can inform that. So a high volume sometimes makes predictive scoring a lot more suitable for your business. If you're a larger enterprise, you have, let's say, a ton of budget around your demand generation programs, that may make it to where you can efficiently manage and score leads at scale to where, you might not have the capability to scale a manual lead scoring model especially if it's not set up in an accurate manner or in its early stages. Lower volume, sometimes manual scoring is sometimes by default, again, assigned to that. That can be effective for businesses or smaller volumes of leads where kind of individual valuation is a lot more feasible in that regard. But that said, again, data availability and quality is also, a part of this. When we talk about that in marketing, what do we usually refer to? It's really the concept of rich data versus limited data. So if a business has access to a lot of comprehensive, high quality data, predictive scoring can be a little bit better here in the sense that the training data that's used in these ML algorithms can leverage to provide more accurate predictions. If your data is limited, the ability of those algorithms to actually scale effectively is going to be definitely in a lower capacity. Data is sparse or it's inconsistent, manual scoring might be more practical in that regard. Resources and expertise. This is kind of something that goes along with the concept of the size of your business, which is, those being technical resources, right? So predictive scoring requires a lot of data science expertise. Do you have the ability to be able to build that technological infrastructure? And then human resources, right? And from a manual lead scoring standpoint, relies more on the expertise and the judgment of marketing and sales. For your business, which side do you have more of a capability in, right? Is it one versus the other? If you have both, is it kind of where do you fall within that area, right? Within the balance between those technological and human resources. Budget's huge, right? So investment capability, predictive lead scoring may definitely even cost you, not from a human resource standpoint, but from a technological standpoint, depending on what you're using to build your lead scoring model, will certainly cost you more, right? So do you have that, available to you? And then I think the one thing here that's part of identifying this issue between how do we go from here and where do we do aligning with your business goals. So that's long-term and short-term scalability and needs. Sometimes long-term scalability from a lead scoring standpoint is more important. Businesses sometimes aim for rapid growth, and scalability might benefit more from predicted scoring. From a short-term standpoint, immediate needs and quick implementation might be sufficient because, again, there are a lot of businesses that don't even have any model in place. Getting something up and running, which is a lot easier manual than predictive, can be prioritized. And then there is the hybrid approach. The hybrid approach in itself, as much as you would think that it would be more commonly used because you can clearly see benefits between the two, is a little bit lost between the cracks sometimes, to be honest with you guys. Many businesses find, that a hybrid approach combining both elements of predictive and manual works best, but they don't know how to implement that. That process in itself has, initial screening criteria that need to be set in place. So using manual criteria for initial lead qualification and then building from there, right? So that being advanced scoring, right? So then applying predictive models to further score and prioritize those leads. So when it comes to hybrid, a lot of times we're not to the point where we have enough to build a predictive lead scoring model, but we have a manual lead scoring model that we use. We're not sure how great it is. But we don't know within that transition how seamlessly we can transition to predictive, or if we have enough data to be able to do so. There are a lot of questions that go into that. From my opinion and my expertise, my standpoint, my thought around it is all of the things that we talked about and all of the key criteria need to be tiered. So for example, if the volume of your leads is something that, is so vast that you don't even have the ability to scale a manual lead scoring model, then sometimes that trumps everything else. If you don't even have the budget to be able to build predictive, even you might have enough data, but you don't have the budget to be able to allocate to a predictive lead scoring model to move there, well, then you better make sure your manual lead scoring model is very accurate, right? Because you got to make sure that it's working properly. So that's kind of two sides of the coin. I think that's kind of where we typically think, the decision can be made somewhere in between the numbers there.
If I'm a startup marketer listening to this, I'm going, wow, this sounds amazing. It sounds hard. And like I mentioned at the top of this episode, you, Arman, have been working on something really, really important that we are going to break here right on Fired Up. Breaking news. Tell us a little bit about the lead scoring template that you're building that we are going to have available for free for our startup marketing friends in the coming weeks, because hearing a little bit about what you're building will ease some of those fears about jumping into the deep end of the pool.
Well, I should preface to say, when it comes to lead scoring, because of manual lead scoring, the most common used CRM directly, without having to have any type of medium in between, to build a lead scoring model from a manual standpoint is HubSpot. A lot of businesses use HubSpot and they leverage HubSpot to be able to identify and implement a lead scoring model. It's also relatively cost effective on HubSpot. So at Firebrand, what we're doing, and we're close to being able to release that, is a manual lead scoring model that can be used directly in HubSpot to help build a HubSpot score, which is the default terminology for your manual lead scoring model in HubSpot, and then also can be used externally from HubSpot. If you don't even want to go to HubSpot and you're just going to go the old-fashioned way, you're going to do it by the books, it's a template that is scalable, and it has default sets of criteria, implicit and explicit data that's identified that should work for most B2B businesses without having too much insight into what your business looks like. We don't know exactly the size or the scale of your teams, but if you take this and you have nothing else to work with, and you're new to lead scoring, and in itself means that you should probably start with manual. If you don't have anything at all, and you're starting somewhere, you definitely should not jump to predictive. For the most part, there are some nuances and caveats that are part of that, depending on enterprise scale, etc. But our goal is to be able to give you something that you can work with to be able to identify, number one, what does an MQL look like for your business if you don't even have already preset criteria defined by sales? This directly comes from marketing. And then from there, how do you get to an SQL, and how can we standardize that process for you? That's what this asset provides. And then from that, the logic that goes into that's pretty clearly explained can help you inform how to build your actual HubSpot score in HubSpot from the logic and the calculation that is built within that model itself. It informs you to be able to do that to a good degree. But then that's kind of where it comes into where then you have to have the resources and the ability to build it from there. But what we give you is the very minimum, a template that you can take and you can use in HubSpot, or you can keep it separate from HubSpot. If you just want to use that to identify leads and score that old by the books, you can do that as well. But we're taking our best attempt that we think is very strong at creating some kind of a criteria that can be used across almost all B2B, regardless of the size of your business.
That's great. That will be such a security blanket for folks to begin that journey, right? And it's great that from the start, it's just as you described, start at the beginning with those, defining MQLs, defining SQLs. And we're going to be making this available to folks for free, which is pretty incredible. That's a huge jumpstart for a lot of our startup brands. I know they're going to really appreciate that. I mean, Arman, you've shared so much information that I want to go back and listen to this and create some content to help with our MQLs for the firm. Maybe we can do that. But for the next part of our program, and thank you again for joining us today, we're going to get a little bit more personal, a little less technical, and Nicole is going to take us through what we call, our listeners know very well, our Fired Up 5 quick fire questions. Nicole, take us through.
Let's do it. These are 5 questions. You give us a quick answer because we want to get to know more about Arman besides the data ninja side. So question number 1, we are thrilled that you are a ninja here at Firebrand, but if you were not in marketing, what would you be doing?
Yeah, had I not been in marketing, I think that early on, particularly that I changed my studies earlier when I was in college, before I graduated, I probably would have ended up continuing biomedical engineering, would have been in that field.
What is the best career advice you have ever been given?
The best career advice I think that I've gotten is, in a few months, you will forget that you even worked here, coming from an internship.
What book do you most often recommend?
I would say East of Eden, even if you're not religious.
Now, we know you almost went off and cured cancer, but didn't have that job, but I'm pretty sure you had a strange job somewhere in your past. What's the strangest job you've ever done?
Strangest job I ever done would probably be, just because it doesn't really fit my personality, was working for Ralph Lauren when I was younger.
Nice. And then what are you excited about, either professionally, personally? Second half of 2024, the dog days of summer are upon us. What are you most excited about for the rest of the year?
I'm excited for the weather to cool down a bit and the football season to start back up. I'm a big Real Madrid fan in football, and we just signed Kylian Mbappe. I cannot wait for the rest of 2024.
There it is. I mean, I expected even more sports references than we had. I expected to hear about wins above replacement value and plus and minus, but we instead heard about MQLs, and I'm sure the rest of the audience is quite grateful for that. Arman, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone needs to really kind of go back and take a listen to this and then think about how they're going to use this new model that we'll unveil in a few weeks coming here. Arman, thanks again for joining Fired Up.
Thank you, guys.
Well, that wraps it up for today. But 2 quick things before we go. First, we've just published our Startup Marketer Outlook, which is a report based on a survey of over 250 senior marketers at early and late stage startups, all about their plans for H2 2024. So please go to firebrand.marketing, and in the resources section, you'll be able to download your copy there. Second, if you've enjoyed the show, please give us a rating or a review. Obviously, subscribe. We really appreciate that, since that helps others discover the show. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week. And in the meantime, get out there and crush your marketing goals.